Good afternoon, East Goshen. Hope you're having a great Tuesday so far. Thank you, as always, for joining me in our weekly devotional videos. It is good to be able to dive into Scripture with you all, and today we're continuing our journey through the book of Ecclesiastes. In Sunday's service, we covered most of chapter 9, so I'm not going to dwell real long in chapter 9, just a quick couple verses at the end. If you haven't had a chance, go ahead and check out Sunday's service, where we talk about the destiny of us all and how Christ changes that. And we ought to invite people to that new destiny. I'm not going to give too much away, but chapter 9 is about done here, and we're moving into chapter 10 today for the majority of our reflection time, chapter 11 for Thursday, and then we're going to wrap the book up on Sunday and cover the entirety of chapter 12. Thanks for sticking it out with me through this book. It is a difficult text to understand, and hopefully we've been able to make sense of it as we read through together. Again, today we're going to be moving from chapter 9 into chapter 10. Just a brief lesson at the end of chapter 9 that we weren't able to cover in Sunday's service. The teacher says that wisdom is better than folly, but it has its limits. Though you may avoid foolishness and be the wisest person and right in your understanding of the world and right in your understanding of what matters in this life, if you're not in the kind of position or authority to use that influence, then people aren't going to be able to listen to your wisdom. The foolish person, if they are in the correct position, is going to be listened to more so than the wise. It's not always the person who is best suited for the task that is given the ability to speak life and truth to the matters at hand, but it is the person who has the best social standing that's listened to. And so while we ought to pursue wisdom, it shouldn't be the chief end of our lives, because in the end, if we aren't in the right position to use it, it's going to be a wasted effort on our part. So that's the lesson that he wants to give at the end of chapter 9. Take it as you will. We're not going to dwell on it too much. Moving into chapter 10, it's an interesting collection of sayings and wise aphorisms by the teacher. And so he gives all of these different pieces of advice about his perspective on the world. And the one that I really want to focus on for today is chapter 10, verse 12, which says, "Words from the mouth of the wise are gracious, but fools are consumed by their own lips." So if we're the kind of people that the teacher wants us to be, then we have a perspective on life that is realistic. We understand our place in the world, and that the things that are fleeting in this life are not the important things that we ought to pursue. Chief amongst the pleasures and gifts that God gives to humankind is companionship, as we talked about in chapter 9. Companionship is one of the greatest goods, one of the greatest gifts of grace that God can give to us. And so if we are a wise individual, if we are focused on the eternal purposes of God for our lives, then we ought to fight as hard as we can for relationship. We ought to be the kind of person that leads with gracious speech and conduct. And so this lesson that the teacher wants to give to us is about that kind of speech, that we ought to be gracious in our speech. We ought to lead with graciousness, as opposed to being abrasive, as opposed to being insistent on our own perspective, as opposed to being rude and derogatory to others. We are first and foremost supposed to be gracious. The fool is the one that undoes themselves with their own speech. It's the person who is unnecessarily rude. It's the person who speaks ill of others. It's the person who does not have a word of encouragement to offer. It's the person who leads with judgment. It's the person who insists on their own perspective. These are all the things that Paul warns about in our conduct with our speech in the book of 1 Corinthians. If we don't have love for one another, then we're just a clanging cymbal, a resounding gong. All of our words are empty and meaningless. And that's the lesson that the teacher wants to convey to us here. If you don't have graciousness for another person, if you are not leading by giving them grace, then you're going to break up your own relationships. The consequences of your own speech will befall you in the end. And there's a danger in the Christian community that we're so entrenched in our own perspective that we never take time to understand the other person. That we don't lead with graciousness, we lead with truth wielded as a blunt instrument that we beat other people over the head with. But the calling of the teacher here and the calling of Paul in his letter to the Corinthians is to lead with graciousness and love, fighting for the relationship above our own perspective, the relationship above what we would like to convey, and the relationship over our snap judgments of another person. So are you being gracious in your speech with other people? Are you leading with compassion and empathy and trying to understand the perspective of another before hastily rushing to judgment? In the end, we only have ourselves to blame for the undoing of relationship. If we break up relationship because of our speech, it's the fitting end to how we treat others. So thank you for joining me today. I know this is kind of a different chapter. Chapter 10 is a hodgepodge of different sayings. Make sure to comb your way through. If you found one that you thought was especially helpful, leave it in the comments below for chapter 10. I'd love to see what stuck out to you, because there's a whole lot here that we could have covered and we could have taken a number of different directions. But what stuck out to you? Tell me in the comments or leave me a message. And I will see you on Thursday for chapter 11. Have a great rest of your day.